Thank you so much for Blair taking your time out to share your insights and thoughts on virtual masterclass on workforce planning for evolving business landscape. This is a need for our, and how much ever we learn on planning or capacity planning or resource planning, every time that I hear from the experts like you, I learn something new. It's not that I know everything, where like here is where you got to share knowledge, and some of you were joined in as a participants also can share your insights. So Blair is going to share ABC of capacity planning, mathematical challenges we all face, and opportunities for the WFM industry to improve, and how you can really bring more value to the table, how to create more economic value to the table, and to the business and the organization is something where we create more value. So with this, I invite Blair McGavin to share his insights and take us through the learning journey for the next 1 hour. And lovely audience, thank you so much for taking your time out to listen to this session. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we will definitely take all your questions at the end. Okay, thank you so much for taking your time out to be part of GWFM Masterclass series. So with this, please join me hands together to welcome Blair. Blair.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I don't think I've ever been part of a call like this. This is amazing. Where one, we got all these participants, but so many participants from all around the world. I've never been on a call where so many different time zones are represented. So kudos to Dr. Shiva for assembling what has to be the largest global network of workforce planning professionals. This is amazing. So that's great. I want to say good morning, but for most of you, it's probably good evening. And as I think about that, for me, it's early Friday morning. I got up at 6 a.m. to get ready for this, but it's your Friday evening. You should be out having fun, and you're going to be sitting listening to a lecture from me on capacity planning. There's something wrong with that, but I think that demonstrates your commitment to this discipline and maybe improving your knowledge. So the pressure is on me, I think, to say a few things meaningful so that you feel like you got some value out of this lecture. But Dr. Shiv alluded to, hey, we've all learned different things in our career. I'm going to share some learnings. I don't have all the answers, but hopefully I could share something that might give you some reason to think a little bit more closely about how you're doing things within your workforce management career. So who am I? Gosh, I'm just like you. I'm someone who has committed his career to this discipline, except I'm a lot older. I've got a lot of wrinkles on my face and a few years behind me, but I'm very committed. And if I were to kind of outline or articulate what are my passions, what do I really want to accomplish in this space, it would be two things. It would be one, for us to have the ability to accurately manage and forecast our service levels. And the second would be, let's save some money. What if we could reduce our budget by about 10%? So those are my goals as a professional in this space. Let's improve our accuracy in managing service levels, and let's try and save some money. And so Dr. Shiva mentioned the Q&A. We were thinking, do we have every 5 or 10 minutes, take a pause or break for some Q&A? We'll probably do that at the very end. So as we're going through the deck, note maybe what slide we were on. When you have thought of a question, we can go back to that slide to address your question. But once again, this is a privilege for me to be with you. And I'm going to share some things that I've learned over the years, and I continue to learn. And I know that many of you on this call have probably learned some additional details that maybe we can talk about afterward. All right. So we're going to talk about the ABCs of capacity planning. So is it possible to build a capacity plan with letters and not numbers? That's possible. We're going to see if we can do that. We're going to look at some of the mathematical challenges that we need to be aware of in this space, and then opportunities for the industry to improve. So as we go through these 3 sections, you're gonna notice some overlap. So I'm gonna say some of the few things over and over. So let's launch into this and see what we come up with. You'll notice there's a there's a photo here of a snowflake. And does that have some relevance? What I've learned over the years, each one of you, how many people on this call? Shiva, Dr. Shiva, 75, 80 people. Every one of us has a different methodology for building a capacity plan. Everything is unique to how you've designed your capacity plan. Everyone is doing it differently. So I want to share a little background with you to give some context to this. 20 years ago, after I'd spent my first stint building a workforce management team that supported about 3,000 agents, I thought, hey, I might have a little bit of knowledge in this capacity planning. Maybe I can help some other companies. So I started doing a little bit of consulting, and I helped 3 or 4 companies build and audit their capacity planning process. And each company I visited and consulted with, I saw something that I had never seen before and never could have thought of. You know, whether it's formulas or calculations or definitions or assumptions or how they compiled the data. I saw something that I never could have imagined. And after 3 or 4 companies, I was naive enough to think, you know what? I've seen everything. I will never see anything different from what I've already seen. Well, guess what? 20 years later, guess what I think? I think that if we looked at and audited each one of your company's capacity plans, I would probably see something that I have never seen before. So capacity plans, they're like snowflakes. Everyone is doing it a little bit differently. Now, if we all took a little bit different route, but we all came back to the same answer, then that would be okay. But guess what? I think we're all coming up with slightly different answers. So I'm going to share with you a few things that I've learned over my career, and hopefully we can identify some opportunities to standardize our approach and how we come up with the requirement, i.e., how many FTE do we need to meet our service level target? Make sense? All right. So is there a basic formula that we can use? And here it is: A divided by B times C times D. That's all you need to know. That's the end-all solution and answer to capacity planning. That's all you need to know. Those are the ABCs and D of capacity planning. Well, as each of you know, what is each one of these variables? A is our call volume, or how many transactions we expect to process. B is productivity. C is occupancy, and D is utilization. Now, utilization might be a word you may not be familiar with, and that's basically the inverse of your shrinkage. So if your shrinkage is 30%, your utilization would be 1 minus 0.3 or 70%. Now, you'll notice that utilization is down in the denominator of the calculation. Some will try to maybe gross up the requirement by putting shrinkage up in the numerator and multiplying it by 1 plus 0.3 as opposed to dividing by 1 minus 0.3. And I know we have a lot of experienced professionals on this call who've already learned that lesson. That yields the wrong answer, and you're going to end up being understaffed. But knowing this formula, that's the easy part. The hard part is figuring out what the correct values are for each one of these variables. And that's why they pay us the big bucks, because we've learned all these lessons to know how to define all this stuff. But now let's see if we can take a closer look at some of these variables to figure out how we build this capacity plan. So as we expand this formula, we see its volume on top, productivity, occupancy, and utilization down in the denominator. So some of the lessons learned. First of all, volume. You know, how many transactions are we going to process? Most of us, when we build our capacity plan, we put offered calls as our call volume. Well, guess what? One of the realities of the call center, which Erlang never really figured out, is that some of our calls abandon. So one of the things we need to do is make a slight adjustment and figure out, I refer to it as an abandoned break-even percent. And I'll show you a scatter plot here in a little minute to help us understand how we get that. But we're not in the business in the call center of processing 100% of our transactions. We don't want to answer 100% of our calls. If we do, we're going to really increase our staffing. So we have to figure out what that abandon percent is. Secondly, what volume do we use? Now, if we could use a weekly call volume, in which case there would be a here, well, and I want to, here in the United States, one FTE is 40 hours per week, but in your country, maybe it's 36 hours or maybe it's 48 hours. So you need to make that adjustment. What is the FTE equivalent? How many hours does each employee work in a given week? But most of us will put that monthly volume in our capacity plan. But the problem or challenge there is that monthly volumes and weekly volumes don't sync up. So we have to apply a factor. Okay, is it 4.2 weeks or 4.3? And, it just gets a little messy. I can show you an example of February volumes versus March volumes. And the monthly volumes are 20 to 25% different, but the FTE requirements are the same. So the capacity plan is trying to help us understand what the FTE requirement is, as opposed to what the budget is going to be. What's going to drive the budget and expenses is the monthly volume. So I like to make an adjustment in that volume and use a 4-week equivalent. 4-week, it's a nice round number. We don't have to worry about fractions. We don't have to worry about how many Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays versus how many Saturdays and Sundays. It's just a nice, even a round number, because the cycle or process that we're managing, it follows weekly cycles, and weeks don't exactly sync up perfectly with the month. I hope that makes sense. So 1, we'll adjust for abandons. 2, I like to use a 4-week volume. And then down in the denominator, productivity, I know everybody on this call knows this. How do you get to productivity from handle time? You basically take 3,600 seconds in an hour and divide it by your handle time. That gives us units per hour. Productivity we think of in units per hour. And then for those of you who've studied chemistry, chemistry is where we learn a lot of how to cancel units. So that units per hour and productivity, where does that hours get canceled out? Well, there's another factor over here on the right-hand side where we've got that 40 hours per FTE per week or 160 hours per FTE per week in a given month or 4-week period. So productivity, pretty straightforward. Now we see occupancy and utilization. They're the other 2 variables in our denominator of our calculation. They have very specific definitions. And here's what I'm referring to. Occupancy, that there's a value in occupancy that also needs to carry over into the utilization. So if occupancy is A over B, A being all of our handle time, B being handle time plus the idle and or available time. So A over B helps us figure out occupancy. That value B in the denominator of occupancy needs to be the value in the numerator of our utilization. So the B's cancel. A over B times B over C, we see that the B's are able to cancel, and then we have a full accounting of all the information. So all the data from an associate's schedule falls into one of 3 buckets. It either falls into the handle time bucket, it either falls into the idle available bucket, or it falls into the shrinkage bucket. So if we define all this correctly, we can multiply occupancy and utilization together. They belong down in the denominator of our formula, and then we can figure out what our true FTE requirement is. Now, a last point I want to make here is there are 2 different types of utilization. One I refer to as a paid utilization, and that drives our budget, and the other is the staffing utilization, and that drives our capacity plan. So budgeting numbers, some of our shrinkage is unpaid, so it doesn't cost us anything. So it doesn't affect the budget, but it does affect our ability to staff the call center and plan for our service level. So when we're building a capacity plan, we want to use all of those shrinkage components, even if some of them are unpaid. So there's a paid utilization and a staffing utilization. For the capacity planning purposes, we want staffing utilization that accounts for every aspect of shrinkage. I hope that makes sense. If you have questions, make a note, and we'll come back to that later on. All right, so there are 4 basic pieces in this puzzle. Are there issues with each? There are, and we need to be aware of them. So one of the aspects of this process that makes it so difficult to, one, quantify what our requirements are and how do we generate optimal schedules is the fact that every one of these variables, there are 4. There's volume, there's handle time, there's occupancy, and there's shrinkage. Every one of those variables is different every interval of the week. There's no such thing as a constant. We obviously know that volume is different. Our tools, they pick up differences in handle time. Our occupancy is going to be different, but our shrinkage is also very different. So we need to ask ourselves, okay, how well is the industry helping us understand how each of these four variables behaves every interval of the week? And is there margin of error in each of these inputs? So we're going to talk about some of this in just a minute. And then I want to introduce this concept of what I refer to as an audit or a reconciliation, or maybe even a gap analysis. So after the fact, does the industry help us reconcile what happened? So we predicted one outcome, but what actually happened was something very different. So does the industry or our WFM tools help us reconcile the gap between what we forecast and what actually happened? And I think that is such a critical element to this process. And it's kind of the foundation to what motivated me to get into this space and spend 20 years trying to design solutions that help us solve some of these problems, is doing this gap analysis. But let's see if we can come up with some examples to illustrate what this means. So let's break down each one of these variables. Let's first take a look at call volume. Is our call volume static or dynamic? So at the beginning of the day, let's say we have a fixed number of customers who are going to try to reach out to us and talk to our agents, or maybe it's through a different channel. But let's assume that's kind of fixed. Is our offered call volume going to be a constant throughout the day, regardless of how we manage the call center? So will our offered calls be fixed depending on how we have staffed the call center? And the answer to that is no. It's going to be a little bit different depending on how we've staffed the call center. If we're overstaffed or understaffed, it's going to have an impact on our call volume. And that comes from this concept of abandons and callback. So if we're forecasting 100,000 calls today, if we're way understaffed, we're not going to be able to answer as many phone calls. We're going to have more abandons, and we're going to get more callbacks. So our offered call volume, if we're understaffed, is going to be slightly greater than that 100K we had forecast. And the inverse is true. If we're overstaffed, we're going to answer more calls than we typically would, and we would have fewer abandons and fewer callbacks. So our offered call volume would come in a little bit below 100,000 phone. So it's not a big difference. It's maybe 1, at most 2%, depending on the severity of the over-understaffing, but it's something to be aware of. How we staff the call center, one, that also impacts our handle time. It also impacts our occupancy, but it also impacts our offered call volume. Now, the second concept, I think, is something you're all familiar with, we all deal with, and that's abandon. One of the challenges is that the Erlang models were designed and they don't account for abandons. They assume that once a customer gets in queue, they stay in queue and they never abandon. That's a problem because in reality, our customers aren't always patient and they're going to hang up. Now, for most service level targets, I've figured out that break-even abandon point is somewhere usually in the 3 to 4% range. I'm going to show you a scatter plot here in a minute that will help us identify what that break-even point is for each one of us. But it's something we have to account for that Erlang doesn't, and we need to factor that into our capacity planning formula. Now, this third point, I apologize, I need to be a little bit vague, but it's something I discovered more recently. A few years ago, I was working for a company, and we did these events where we took half our workforce half our agents off the phone. And I was watching the process, and boy, the volume and staffing looked consistent, but service levels were so much worse than what we'd anticipated. And then I saw something that I'd never noticed before. So when you are really understaffed, there's something really, really crazy that happens to call volume. I apologize for not being more specific here because I don't want other people thinking about it before I have a chance to design and build a solution to fix it. But it has a huge impact, and nobody is accounting for it in this process of trying to predict how service levels are going to behave. So at a high level, volume, what is the margin of error with some of these issues with volume? I would categorize them in the small to medium range, with the exception of this last item. If you're really understaffed, it can be a really large issue that impacts our call volume. So that's a quick review on some of the issues with call waiting. What about handle time? Well, handle time is our productivity component. We all understand, without a productivity component, how do we build a capacity plan? So how does the industry help us manage and understand handle time? Well, they're looking at a historical average. They're going back 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, at 10:30 a.m. in the morning on Mondays, our handle time is usually 348 seconds. It's a value. It works okay, but could we do better? Yeah, I think we could do better. And I think we could do better if we thought of handle time as a function. Now, there are at least two variables, and you can probably think of what they are, that have an impact on our handle time. Let's think of them as metric A and attribute B. And if we have a really smart workforce management tool, we should be able to look into the future 3 or 4 hours and see, okay, you know what? Metric A is going to behave like this and attribute B is going to be like this. Let's plug that information into the model and let the model tell us what our handle time is going to be. Instead of just relying on this simplistic approach of looking at a historical average, let's build a function. So that function, I think, can do a better job, reduce the margin of error of handle time, which is productivity, which we know is all very important. So what's the margin of error in handle time? Once again, I don't think it's too huge, but every area where we can identify little opportunities to improve the accuracy in the process, that's going to give us opportunity to give ourselves some efficiency. All right, Shiva, Dr. Shiva, I don't know, I'm hoping you have a swag store and some gift certificates handy, and maybe you can keep an eye on the chat box to see if people know the answer here. But I was hoping to maybe give away some gift certificates. This is nothing more than a joke. We're not going to win any money here, but here's a really important question. There are 4 basic variables that drive a capacity plan. Dr. Shiva, see if you can check to see if people can type in the chat box the answer here. Which variable is the Erlang-C formula trying to help us understand? So there's 4 variables.
Audience can take this as a question and answer it in the chat box.
Anyone know Erlang-C, queuing theory? Wow, really sophisticated formula. It's trying to help us understand one variable. What variable is it? Has anyone typed in any answer? This is really important.
Anyone would like to answer? Please use the chat box.
Ooh, interesting. All right. Well, okay, here's the answer. It's trying to help us understand occupancy. Erlang-C is trying to, and I want to come back to this. If we get some questions on AI and different channels, we're going to come back and talk about occupancy. It's trying to help us understand occupancy. So we give it the inputs, volume, handle time, service level target. It gives us an output. Okay, given this workload, here's how many people you need on the phone. So let's say there's 90 Erlangs, or an Erlang is 1 FT worth of work. So the workload is 90 Erlangs, and it tells us we need 100 agents to meet service level. Well, that doesn't answer the occupancy question, but we can figure it out working backwards. So 90 over 100, in effect, would be our occupancy with one slight adjustment, and that is the abandoned. Remember, calls abandoned. So it wouldn't be 90, maybe 3% of those would be lost. So our occupancy would be about 87 over. Erlang is trying to help us understand occupancy, but it's trying to help us understand what it is at the interval level. And we're going to talk about multiple reasons for occupancy. So, second question. If Erlang were correct, i.e., if we looked at the workload and its requirements and come up with an occupancy value and summed that across all intervals of the week, is that the answer that we would want to use in our overall capacity plan? Remember, variable down in the denominator, occupancy is one of those values.
Blair, there are some answers already from few people. Jonathan mentioned, this is for the first question. Jonathan Lim has mentioned service level. And then we have Mark has mentioned occupancy. Then Kiran Priya has mentioned, okay. Kiran, now the chat is open. You can use the chat box.
All right. Yes. So occupancy is what Erlang is trying to help us understand. And yes, it's trying to help us predict what the service level is going to be. Now, given that, is that the value we want to use in our capacity? And the answer is no. There are multiple reasons why occupancy is part of this process. And the industry has been trying to use Erlang to answer both questions. One, how is the interval going to behave? Two, how many FTE do we need to meet our service level targets, i.e. the capacity planning value? Those are two very different models, very different questions, and very different answers. How occupancy behaves in one interval versus the occupancy we need to use in our capacity plan, two completely different values. And that's one of the points I really want to drive home here. Occupancy is there are multiple reasons, and the interval is just one answer, and that's what Erlang was designed to do. It's got blinders on. Okay, how will this one interval behave? But what we use in the capacity plan is completely different. All right, are there issues with the third variable, occupancy? Are there issues with occupancy? Obviously there are. This is the most difficult and mysterious metric for us to figure out. And as I mentioned, Erlang or queuing theory is designed to answer one of those questions. Now, it doesn't do a very good job. Now, there are some people who think, you know, Erlang used to work, but given our skill-based routing, it doesn't work very well right now. Well, I'm of the opinion it never worked. And now the margin of error is even greater because our call routing is so complex. But there are multiple reasons why occupancy is part of this process. How the interval behaves is one thing, and what we need in the capacity plan is another. So there are multiple layers to this concept, and I apologize, I'm not going to give too much specific answers on this, but it's extremely difficult. We need to be able to quantify all of these components and how it's behaving at different stages of the process. But here in a minute, I'm going to show you a scatter plot so that you can get an example of how to say, okay, how do we understand how it's behaving for our capacity plan for the current process? What's the margin of error in occupancy? Now, this could be in the medium range. This is, Erlang, the margin of error in Erlang is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's not the value. We don't want to use Erlang to help us figure out the capacity. All right, the fourth variable, shrinkage. Boy, if there's one thing I've learned about shrinkage, this is the most difficult metric to get our arms around and really understand how it behaves. It's not super complicated, but it just takes effort and muscle and work. There's so many different pieces and different possible definitions. So, and it's not a constant. If any of your shrinkage assumptions, you're using flat percentages, guess what? This variable behaves, it has strong patterns, just like call volume. They're very strong patterns to shrinkage, and our workforce management tools are not doing a very good job of helping us see and understand those patterns. And here's another concept. How does it behave during our regular shift, i.e. 40 hours in a week, versus how does it behave on our overtime? Two very, very different values. So if we've identified, we've got some intervals that are understaffed, we need some overtime. Okay, we need 10 more people on the phone during this interval. I need to gross that amount up by some value of shrinkage, right? Well, what shrinkage value do you use? Overtime shrink is very different. So comparing all four variables, I think the most consistent and largest margin of error is being introduced by our lack of understanding of how shrinkage behaves every interval of the week. All right, hopefully that maybe generates some questions and we can come back to them. I can see the Q&A's got 10 questions, so they're loading up, Dr. Shiva. They're ready to let me have it. All right, let's move on. Okay, here's another trivia question. Is overtime good or bad financially? We got to, service levels are important, but what's more important than service level is being profitable and understanding our cost structure. So why I say that, now in each country, how overtime is dealt with could be very different. Here in the United States, they get paid 50% more. So if I'm making $20 an hour during my regular shift and I work some overtime, I'm going to make $30 an hour. Wow, that's a big increase. That's a lot more money. What does that do to us financially? Is it good or bad? Well, the salary component hurts us. But here's something to think about. And I don't have slides going into the detail here, but I want to get you thinking about it. Every associate has a different cost profile. And there are 5 variables in that cost profile. There's salary, there's benefits, there's productivity or handle time, there's occupancy, and there's utilization. Salary goes up, but these other variables work to our advantage. So in most cases, now there's probably an example where this may not be true, but in most cases, our unit cost goes down on overtime. What? Did he just say that? Our unit cost goes down? Yeah, we're paying people more money, but we need to look at the whole picture, not just salary. How the other variables behave work to our advantage, and our unit cost goes down. We need tools that can help us see all this information so that we can factor that into our management so that we know how to manage the budget as well as our service level. All right, we're moving on. How are we doing on time, Dr. Shiva? We doing all right?
We're good.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. So here are a couple examples of the scatter plot. So we got to figure out, okay, what occupancy value do I put into my capacity plan? So on the left is a scatter plot of how we figured out what that break-even point for occupancy is for our call center. Now here's the other point I want to drive home. Occupancy is unique to your contact center. How it behaves in your contact center is different from any other points, represents 1 day's worth of data. So if we looked at this data point right here, if you can see my mouse, we had about a 74% occupancy and we had about a 97% service level. So if we take 2 or 3 months worth of data, plug it into this, and then fit a line to the data, and if our service level percent target were 90% in 30 seconds, here we have 90%, we come up to the line and we identify our break-even point would be at about 73% occupancy. So this simple method is going to help you understand, okay, what occupancy value should we use in our capacity plan? Now, how occupancy behaves at each interval is a very different answer from what this model right here would tell you. But this is the all-in value. Now, the other scatter plot we need to build helps us understand what our break-even abandon rate point is. Remember, we're not in the business of trying to answer 100% of our calls. So we need to back out some of our abandons. So in this particular example, if we've learned from this graph over here, okay, if our break-even occupancy is 85%, so we did the same thing here. Each one of these data points would represent 1 day's worth of abandons and 1 day's worth of occupancy. So if we come over here, if our break-even point is 85% occupancy, we would come to the line and then come down and realize, okay, break-even value that we need to subtract on abandons would be about 4.2%. I hope that makes sense. We'll see this. No, one other point I want to make here. Saturdays and Sundays, our call volume drops off, which means we're going to have lower occupancy to hit service level. So I separate Saturday and Sunday data from the Monday through Friday data. So I'll build this graph with data from Monday through Friday results, and then I'll build another graph for Saturday and Sunday data. It's going to be a different value, and then kind of take a weighted average of the two to figure out, okay, what my weekly occupancy is going to be for my capacity plan, and then do the same on the abandon rate. So I hope that makes sense. We don't have a lot of time at this point, but maybe some questions will come up later we can look at. All right. So that's a review. That's taking a little bit of a deep dive into the 4 inputs. I want to talk about some of the industry challenges, but this is going to be a little bit of review of what we already talked about. So you're going to see me kind of beating up on a handful of common points that we all need to be aware of. So the first is, okay, what are some of the fundamental challenges we're all facing? Well, surprise, surprise. The first one, the ability to manage and forecast our service level. We need service level, 3 different, too complicated, and it's unique. So we need some customized models. We need to figure out how to account for these abandons. But right now, we are really missing the target with being able to manage and forecast service level. All right, this is the second point. We've already gone through these inputs. So down here on the bottom right, this is what one of the Erlang C formulas look like, and depending on which variable you're trying to solve for. Now, one of the traps I think we fall into is this trap that, boy, it looks sophisticated, it's really complicated, I don't understand it, therefore it must work. Well, don't fall into that trap. We need to be challenging our providers of workforce management software and saying, hey, Can you prove to me that your modeling works and that you can forecast my service level? So if our objective is here, we're trying to predict service levels. Well, there's two components. One, understand the inputs, as we've already talked about, but we also need a black box formula that understands this relationship between workload, staffing, and our service level targets. And that's one thing that I think is really missing. These models need to be customized to your business. We're going to talk more about it. All right, here's that snowflake again, capacity plans. Capacity plans are like fingerprints and snowflakes. Each one of us, we're a bunch of smart workforce management professionals. We spent a lot of time thinking about this. We've all built a different maze of spreadsheets building a capacity plan. That's a problem. And to really get good at this, 1 at the interval level, 2 at the daily level, 3 at the weekly level, we need 2 or 3 models that don't exist in our world. And the answer is not early. Get our arms around how shrinkage behaves. Okay, let's see what's next. And I'm sure, boy, look at those questions. We got 12 capacity plans. All right, occupancy, my favorite topic. Most difficult metric to understand. So this is what I want to drive home. There are multiple reasons why occupancy is part of the plan, multiple models to quantify different skills is down to about 30% this time. 65 different skills, 35 different routing profiles. And each routing profile, as you know, is assigned a different combination of skills. Do you realize that each one of your routing profiles is different? So how this matrix is configured is unique to your business. And you need a model that is unique and can understand this relationship, this overlapping of skills between routing profiles instead of a button. See, Erlang is designed to answer a question for one of these boxes. You realize that? It's a one-dimensional model. It can't see the sharing of resources across routing profiles is unlike anyone else's, which means occupancy is going to behave in your call center unlike anyone else. All right, what's next? Let's see, occupancy, confidence, and service level forecast. Here's an interesting quote, and I wonder if anyone can, well, I'd offer some money if I had some gift certificates, but here's the quote. If they can't explain it, should we trust it? What do I mean by that? If they can't explain it, should we trust it? We had a forecast. Here's what we thought was going to happen. So this is where I want to get in and introduce this concept of doing a reconciliation or having an audit trail. Can we prove to the user that our modeling and forecasting actually works? There is a way to do this. I'm not going to be able to share with you the details of what this actually looks like for a workforce management. Across the top is the forecast that our service level, or I'm sorry, our workforce management application, how service levels were going to behave today. So our WFM tool thinks we're going to have this perfect day at almost 90% service levels the entire day. Wow, this is like heaven. Whether it's 90 and 30 or 90 and 60, this is the sweet spot. In my years of running call centers, I have never seen a call center hit service levels like that consistently, that perfect. But guess what? What actually happened was complete we're overstaffed. So we're way understaffed and we're way overstaffed, but our software thinks we're going to have this beautiful day at 90% through. How does that happen? Every time we see this, or at the end of every interval, we should be asking the question, why? Why did the actual outcome differ so much from what you had forecast? Give me an itemized breakdown so that I can have confidence in your forecast. So we're going to take a look at an example from a financial example. So let's pretend we have a portfolio. All right, we have a portfolio of 2 different stocks. We have IBM stock and we have eBay stock. And here we have, so there's 4 variables in this example: number of shares and the price. So in Q1, we had 225 shares of IBM stock and 625 shares of eBay. Portfolio had gone up by 71,900, and we had 245 shares, 675 shares, stock price at 175, and the stock price on eBay had gone down to 43. Well, okay, so our portfolio went up by 10.6%. Well, give me an itemized breakdown so that I understand how much each variable contributed to my net increase. So you could probably figure out the math, but we can apply some basic math and we can figure out, okay, the increase in shares of IBM stock caused the portfolio to go up by 4.6%. The increase in number of eBay shares caused it to go up by 3.8%. The increase in the IBM stock price caused it to go up by 8.6%, and the drop in the eBay stock caused it to go down by 6.7%. So this 10.6% increase, now I know how much each variable contributed to my overall variance. Well, what if we applied this same discipline to this, managing of service levels? What if we'd forecast we forecast our portfolio would have $65,000. It ended up with 71.9. Why did we end up with more money than we anticipated? Well, now we know why. I know how much each variable contributed to my variance. Now I can adjust my assumptions and we can update the model to see what the process looks like. So I have examples of what this actually looked like, but I need to be careful what I share so that I don't get other people thinking about it too soon. But we need to apply this type of discipline to managing service levels. And what about managing our budget or managing our unit cost of each one of our skills and activities? There's a lot of opportunity here. All right. So opportunities, we're wrapping up here. Opportunities for the workforce management industry to reinvent itself. Well, I think you can already anticipate what I'm going to say. First of all, we need customized service level models. There are 3 different service level metrics, not just 2 or not just 1, there are 3. And we need to understand how all components of occupancy are behaving. We need to see that so we can see where we're losing efficiency. But as I said, occupancy is unique to your contact center. How you've configured your skills and routing profiles, how you do your scheduling, it is all unique. So what works in your neighbor's contact center is not going to work in your contact center. So that's the first opportunity. Second, capacity planning. Well, we've all got these, and we're currently doing. What about scheduling efficiencies? So we talked about building the requirement. How do we build the requirement? There's 4 pieces to that puzzle: volume, handle time, occupancy, shrinkage. So if we can minimize the margin of error in each of those 4 inputs, and then if we understand how your matrix of routing profiles works and understand how that feeds into occupancy, we can generate a more accurate requirement, which means, okay, if we can generate more efficient schedules, we can create some opportunities in occupancy. So what if we could create schedules that look like this? If that blue line represents that more accurate requirement, and we were able to generate schedules like that red line, that's going to give us some efficiencies. And those efficiencies are going to come in the form of occupancy, i.e. the ability to meet our service level target at a higher occupancy. But we got to fix a lot of modeling issues before we can get to this point. But this, what did I say I was passionate about? Managing service levels and creating some efficiencies and cost savings, i.e. allowing our process to be more efficient. All right, next opportunity, this concept of variance reporting, doing the gap analysis. How, all this information and all these forecasts, how do I know that what you're providing me is accurate? We need to see these variance reports to understand what's causing our variances. And then as we understand what's causing the variances we've identified, now we can adjust all of our assumptions in the remainder of the year to figure out how it's going to impact the budget, how it's going to impact our unit cost, and how it's going to impact all of our service levels. And there's also another opportunity to kind of do a staffing variance analysis. So this concept of reporting on variances, if we don't build a solid foundation, we can't do the gap analysis. So we need to have that foundation in place so that we can give to the user detailed variance explanations so they can see why the process behaved different from what we had anticipated. All right, now integrating all this functionality into one application. What if we pull in the financials, we pull in the strategic planning so that WFM, capacity planning, financial analysis, strategic planning, and the variance reporting, it's all bundled into one nice, neat application. That's kind of the vision that I have for this industry. And it's something I started working on about 20 years ago. I think it's very feasible. And I think it's going to give us the opportunity to meet those two objectives, increase the accuracy in managing service levels and give us some efficiency. All right, we're almost done. All right, so what are the benefits? If we push the limits of this industry, what can we hope for? We're going to see accuracy in managing service levels. We're going to see this integrated functionality. So instead of different applications and modules, having all this bundled into one neat application, and the visibility into our financial infrastructure. This is the frontier that nobody's really tapped into. Being able to see the detail behind our cost structure. That is a huge frontier, and that's where I think there's a real big opportunity. So how much do I think we can save? I think this could be about 10%. Some of the smaller contact centers, it might be closer to 15%. And it's going to come in two areas. One, it's going to come from being able to meet our service levels at a higher occupancy. And secondly, being able to see the detail behind our financial, where we're seeing big variances that we may not understand, what's driving financial variances, seeing how we're spending money. Boy, there's a frontier there. There's some reporting. I wish I could share it with you, but I got to be careful about what I expose. But there's opportunity to give us some efficiencies with better accuracy, higher occupancy, and being able to see the detail behind our financials. All right, good news, bad news. So this methodology that we've gone through here, explaining some of the fundamentals of capacity planning, is that going to give you efficiencies and cost savings? Unfortunately, it's not. It's going to help you better understand what the current FTE requirement is for your contact center and for the existing inefficiencies that exist in your contact center. So instead of seeing big swings and understaffing, understanding the fundamentals and methodology are going to help you smooth that out so you understand the true requirement given your current process. So what if you're really, really good at this process, and I mean really, really good, I'm trying to manage expectations here. Our job is to manage this process at the interval level. We don't have the detail to do a very good job there. So we're trying to figure out, okay, maybe at a weekly level, what is our FTE requirement? So understanding those fundamentals, we can build a more accurate capacity plan for weekly FTE planning. I think the best we can hope for is maybe to get within 1 or 2% of the actual FTE requirement, if you're really, really good. But if we want to drive efficiencies and save some money, we need smarter tools that manage more detail at the interval level and have better models to help us understand how occupancy behaves, even how shrinkage behaves. So this is something that I started working on about 20 years ago. I've designed it and I'm getting close to building it. I don't want to make too much of a pitch there, but there is an opportunity for a much smarter application, accuracy, functionality, efficiencies, and financial savings. All right. We're almost done. This very last slide, we'll have a Q&A, and if I can go out of this mode, maybe we can look at some of these schedules. But if you have any questions, I would glad to help. Helping people understand some of these fundamentals with capacity planning. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and if you got some basic questions about how you're doing capacity planning, please shoot me a note, and I'll be glad to help you out and answer some of your questions. Now,
thanks, Blair, for very detailed presentation on planning. I think we really learned a lot in the process. And we have a lot of questions by the audience.
Okay.
Thanks, Syed, for commenting that wonderful session. Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. If you could take a look at it now. The first question is from Jonathan Lame. He asked this question.
Yeah. How do we get occupancy of a specific account campaign? So I'm assuming you're talking about maybe doing this in advance. We want to avoid ballpark so we can determine the correct FTE for said requirement. Wow. I don't know that I have a great answer. Here's from some real detailed modeling that I've done, understanding how it behaves at the interval level versus what's in your occupancy. What I've found in a call center that had about 1,500 agents, within the interval, our service level, we hit our service level at an occupancy of roughly 95 to 98% within each interval. But the value that we ended up using for our capacity plan was in the anywhere from 83 to 86%. So the value in your capacity plan is going to be much lower than the value that captures that relationship within each interval. So just based on experience and ballparking, yeah, I don't, Erlang isn't going to help you. We need a smarter WFM tool that helps us capture the scheduling efficiencies. So the other reasons why we lose occupancy is tied to scheduling. It's not, Erlang is designed to try and account for variability within the interval. So how the interval behaves is one thing, but then the efficiencies on the scheduling side is where all the other inefficiencies come from. So the capacity planning value is much lower. So if your break-even point from that scatter plot, might be about 85%, what you might experience at an interval level could be 96, 97% if you want to run that high. But that's where you start to burn out your agent. So you might have to put some constraints in place so that you don't go above that 92 to 94% range. You need a smart WFM tool. One that accurately understands how the intervals behave, and then two, can quantify the lost efficiencies from schedule. All right, webinar chat, no, as Erlang does not include abandons. Yeah, that's one of the realities we have to deal with, is the fact that, calls abandon, and Erlang doesn't account for that. And so some people put no in there, and I'm assuming that was maybe to my question about, okay, if Erlang gives us one value for occupancy, is that the value we want to put in our capacity plan? No, it's not. What's going to go in your capacity plan is going to be much lower than how one interval behaves. Hours of operation, high server, can't sharing and chat depends. How to come on the conclusion of what shrinkage percent should be factored for overtime during the peak seasons. Okay, so I've seen, how does shrinkage is so different, whether it's like a BPO provider or an in-house corporation. I've seen shrinkage in some US-based corporations where it's as high as 50 to 55%. Can you believe that? 50 to 55% shrinkage. So 45% of their time is logged into the phone. That is crazy. But I've seen some BPOs where their total shrink is maybe in the 20 to 25% range. 30 plus might be average. But that's the all-in shrink. But when we get on overtime, the only shrinkage you really typically see on overtime is kind of the lost adherence or lost conformance, which might be 5, 6, 7%, and maybe an occasional break. Most overtime is usually done in 1 to 2 hour increments, and they don't get that third break. But if you're giving them an additional break in their overtime, that might be an additional reason. So shrinkage on overtime is probably going to run in that 5 to 8% range, whereas shrinkage during my regular full 40-hour shift could be anywhere from 35% to 50%. So ballpark number, maybe shrinkage on overtime is a lot less, which is one of the reasons why that helps our unit cost. That helps offset that 50% increase in salary that we're paying. Hope that makes sense. Hi, I'm fairly new in the field. What would be the ideal percentage of headcount? I would need some more context to understand what would be the ideal percentage of headcount per FTE. If everybody's full-time, that would be a one-to-one relationship. Now, if you're looking at part-timers, does having part-timers give us efficiencies? It might. Your workforce management tool might be able to fit part-time schedules more efficiently than full-time schedules, but that's actually one of the features that a WFM tool should give us as we make adjustments in the type of schedules. How much is it costing us in schedule efficiency? So there's a cost. So, as we play with those constraints, we need to be able to quantify the efficiencies we gain or lose as we give benefits back to the associates. And that is really hard to do. Okay, I'm looking here. While AHT and volume should be forecasted on an interval level, From a WFM standard, shall shrinkage utilization should be planned long-term forecast greater than 2 months or more on an interval level 2, or at least it should be daily. Boy, there's a lot of questions embedded in that, and I'm gonna maybe take a stab. So I could show you some graphs. I wonder if I've got them in here. Okay, can you see this? Can you see this slide? This is an example of how shrinkage behaves in two different companies. And these are some of the patterns that we need to understand if we're looking 2 or 3 months into the future to generate an optimal schedule. We need to have this kind of information. So the company on the left, it started out at the first interval of the day at 35%, dropped down to 15%, and then by midnight at the end of the day, it was up to 46%. This call center over here on the right, it started out at the beginning of the day about 28%, peaked at 51%, and then dropped back down to 40%. And these are patterns. So if we're looking into the future, we're trying to generate schedules 2 or 3 months in advance. We need to understand these patterns and the expected magnitude, the seasonality. So yes, at the interval level, this information needs to be fed into our scheduling tool as we try to generate those optimal schedules. This is one of the biggest opportunities in my opinion, they have completely failed on this concept right here. So don't get me going on this. All right, where did we end up? Okay, are we almost? What are the upcoming smart tools that will help the WFM team plan this for better planning in advance? All right, I don't want to make a big pitch here. I've spent the last 20 years designing a solution. So I've alluded to a lot of problems and a lot of issues. I've spent 20 years designing models that solve all these issues and provide this reporting. But it's not, initially it wasn't about solving the issues with service levels and capacity planning. I wanted to design a financial analysis tool. So ultimately all this information we're managing and looking at, it feeds the budgeting process. So that's why I want to integrate all this functionality into one application. So I'm working on that. What percent consider as occupancy for fluctuating volume demand while plotting the FT? I'm not sure I understand what that means. What percent consider as for fluctuating volume? If you're talking about, how do you absorb an event? So if you have an event where a system outage, you're not gonna plan for that. You can't absorb a 100 or 200% increase in call volume. So you're just going to have some crazy service levels with serious abandon rate. But as far as, boy, my phone just thought I asked him a question. So one, we need to do a better job of how occupancy behaves within the interval, but then we also need to be able to quantify the scheduling inefficiencies. That's the other reasons why we lose occupancy. Instead of building a capacity plan at 95%, which would burn out our associates, our capacity plan might be down at 85%. And that's because of scheduling. So we need a tool that can help us quantify what that cost is. And, are there areas where we can improve that? Or, if this is something we're giving back to the associates, whether it's consecutive days off, consecutive start times, whatever it is, tell me what it's costing and let me as a management team make that decision. Okay, it's going to cost us 1.5% to give this benefit back to the associates. That's a cost, that's an investment we're willing to make in our associates. So give me the information I need so that I as a management team can make that. All right. Anything else out there that anyone is we've gone, boy, we're a little over an hour. Dr. Shiva, any other thoughts or questions on how to proceed or what we want to do from here?
Yes, Blair, there are some more questions in the chat box besides the Q&A. If you could look into the chat box, there's some questions asked by a few of them. Probably, like we could answer them if possible. I know that, we took a little more time, but, we have very interesting questions from many of them. If you could try to answer them, it'll be great.
Okay, let's maybe, let's see. Okay, I'm going to expand this. Well, Okay. Feel free, Dr. Sorry about this. Can someone please record this session depending on the demand? Let's see what this, depending on the demand of OT, we were expecting a prolonged OT driven by bad capacity. It's bad. It's 1, 2, 3. That's a question. Bad, yeah, as we end up paying more money. Okay, that's that question about is overtime good or bad financially? Well, don't just think about the salary. There are 4 other variables in the cost profile, and how those variables behaves offsets that 50% increase in salary. So overtime, believe it or not, is more economical. Now, if your shrinkage is higher, then it's really economical. If your shrinkage is all-in shrinkage is lower, then it becomes less economical. But for in most cases, it's almost always advantageous financially to think about overtime. But the flip side of that is you don't want to burn them out. Noting that scatter plot relies on historical data, what is the recommended trending data that we should reference for the scatter plot? I'm not sure I understand that. Noting it relies on historic, what is the recommended trended data? So each, like I said, I like to look at about 3 months worth of data. You fit a line to the data, and I usually find that I think the exponential curve to the second or third power usually ends up giving the best fitted line when you fit a line to those scatter plots. I was so excited. I thought the tool is already available. I'm sorry, it is not. I'm about to get the funding approved, and then it's going to take me 2 years. But please connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can follow the journey. And or if you have any questions about your capacity plan, like I said, I will gladly help you understand some of the basics that we've talked about. Any POC whom we can get in touch with for any details regarding this webinar in the future. Shiva is going to post this, and we'll probably provide the deck as well. Thank you for explaining on the shrinkage question. It helps. All right. Anything else out there that anyone has a quick question on? Well, this has been fun for me, and I wish, boy, I can't. You can see my face, but I can't see your faces. I wish I could see all the faces of all these people around the world. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And you know, this is, I don't think I've ever been part of an event like this. You know, so many people, so many different time zones, so many different professionals who love and are passionate about workforce management. You see, I'm very passionate about this, and I have very high expectations for this process and for this industry. And my hope is that someday I can give you answers to all this. So thanks for your time. I hope you enjoy your Friday evening, and please don't make a habit of spending your Friday evenings learning about capacity planning. There's more to life than capacity planning.
Thanks, Blair. Thanks everyone for taking your valuable time planning. And while you have fun, this is something very important to learn something new about planning. And Blair, thank you so much for taking your time out to prepare and present, and also very smartly answer the questions. And as GWFM is supporting on knowledge sharing and professional networking, this is something that like you have a great contribution to the community. Really, we express deepest gratitude for your valuable time that you're taken to share your insights and experiences. Hope to see you in future of events regularly on some of the same topics, or probably any other topics.
Kudos to you for building Global WFM. This is amazing. What a great forum, and so many people all over the world. I'm sorry that you had to listen to this in English. I wish I could have been able to deliver this lecture in each of your respective native languages, but we had to do it with English today, so my apologies. But this is awesome. This is a great forum. A good job to you for making this happen.
Thanks, Blair. Your valuable time has really made great knowledge sharing and shared a lot of new insights and great. I myself have learned a lot. I'm sure that all the audience would have learned something new.
All right. Well, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll help you answer any of your questions.
Looking forward to seeing you in our future of events. Wonderful. Thank you.